Peh-Guttural verbs refers to when the first root letter of the verb is a guttural letter. In this case, I'll use to stand, ayin, mem, dalet, to illustrate. Well, first, we want to compare this against the strong verb, so-called. In this case, I'll use shin, mem, resh to keep as an illustration. Now, kal imperfect is yishmor. And in the nifal imperfect, the noon from the stem or binyan assimilates into the sheen. So we have yishamer. And in the case of the hifial, our primary indicator that it's a hifial imperfect is the patak under the prefix pronoun. And the secondary indicator in some of the forms is the hirik yod between the ayin letter and the lamed letter. Now, in the case of Peh-Guttural verbs, some of the forms undergo changes, and here we find the kal imperfect. We'll notice that instead of a simple shva under the ayin, as is very characteristic of ayins, it insists on having a hatuf patak or patak shva. And there's also an assimilation of the first root letter of the first letter under the prefix pronoun also to a patak. Now, in the case of the nifal, we have a little bit of a different thing going on. What happens is, since the noon cannot assimilate into the ayin, the letter underneath the prefix pronoun is lengthened to a tsere. And so this is pretty typical because it's a compensation or compensatory lengthening because of the failure of the noon to assimilate. And then finally, you'll notice that the only real difference we can see between the kal and the hifial in the case of an Peh-Guttural with an ayin letter is the secondary indicator of the hirik yod. So we have to be cautious when we see the patak under the prefix pronoun to decide whether it's a kal or a hifial. One illustration. Vayomer ha-navi al ta'avadu et Elohei ha-goyim. The subject here is Navi, prophet, and the prophet said, "Do not serve the gods of the nations." We'll focus on the verb that's used here in the prophet's direct discourse, ta'avadu. Now this verb is in the imperfect to MP. All of that looks fairly normal. Now, at first, we might be tempted to think that this is a hifial because of the patak under the prefix pronoun. However, once we notice that there's an ayin in the pei position, we realize, oh, the patak may not be because of a hifial, but rather it's assimilated because of the demands of going into the ayin letter. So, in fact, that's correct. This is a kal imperfect to MP. And so just briefly, we'll want to compare this. I'm going to use 3 blank root letters for right now. And if this were a kal imperfect to MP of a strong verb, we would expect it to look like this, with the hirik, shva, shva, and ending with the surik. So the difference is the assimilation of the letters under the prefix pronoun and also under the first root letter into patak. And that's pretty characteristic of the Peh Peh-Guttural word.